Hello and welcome to the Practice Marketing Podcast, highlighting successful strategies from North America's fastest growing clinics and experts so you can learn from their wins and power your practice growth. Hi, I'm your host, Neil Trickett, CEO of Practice Promotions, and today we're going to talk with the NeuFit Method founder, Garrett Salpeter, who has a background in engineering and neuroscience, and he's the founder of NeuFit, and he's the creator of the patented Neubie device. And so in business, he's been a 3-time Inc. 5000 CEO, and his NeuFit's technology is used in hundreds of different private practices, as well as 50-plus professional sports teams. So he's going to tell us about his journey to developing the NeuFit method, which uses direct current stimulation to help rehabilitate patients. And he'll also share his journey from an engineering student to a highly successful CEO. So Garrett, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Neil. It's great to be here, and hello, everybody.
Awesome. All right, so let's dive in here. Love to know, how you first came up with the NeuFit as a methodology and kind of your background and how this came to transpire.
It's one of these sort of unique scenarios where I actually feel very grateful I was able to find something where all of my different interests overlap. You mentioned in the bio, my background is more in engineering and neuroscience. And I also was a hockey player. I grew up in Chicago, ended up playing, a little bit in college and just really loved it and dove in and was very passionate about physiology and training as a means to helping myself become a better athlete. Mm-hmm. And so I also along the way had a lot of, injuries as I was an athlete, and I was very disenfranchised, disappointed with the traditional physical therapy, traditional orthopedic medicine that I had experienced. And at one point I thought about going pre-med, but with those experiences, I just felt like, it just wasn't really for me. And then, fast forward several years, I was towards the end of my time in college, I was playing hockey, I was a pre-engineering student, and I had an injury. And I was frustrated. I was told I was going to have surgery. I was such a bummer. And then through a friend of a friend, I met a doctor who was doing, a chiropractor who was doing functional neurology and using older versions of direct current. So this was my first real exposure to how important the nervous system is in healing, even when we're talking about something that's more tissue-based like ligaments, how locally the nervous system can, support the area as it's healing, and globally the autonomic nervous system, how relevant that is. And then I also used with him older versions of direct current. So it was more like a microcurrent analog device with different knobs and dials and such. Mm-hmm. And I saw firsthand how this combination of direct current and really emphasizing the nervous system and managing its response to injury, that helped me, heal from injury, recover, and avoid surgery. So I was relieved as an athlete, right? Not, to be able to get back out there, but as a pre-engineering student, to find something that finally made sense scientifically from first principles. I was just elated. I was just so happy, so excited about that. And I felt a calling within me to share that work with as many people as I could. And so I ended up, I ended up working after I finished my master's in engineering, I kind of pivoted and started working, as a quasi clinician. Of course, I'm not a clinician, but I was working in a chiropractic office underneath that person. And then that business grew. And so for 7 or 8 years, I was actually working with people using older versions of electrical stimulation as I went back to graduate school for more neuroscience work. And I just kept seeing ways I wanted to improve the technology, improve the methodology. And finally, whole series of events led me to finally come to the decision that, if I want it done, I got to do it myself, and decided to create the Neubie and launch NeuFit. And, the time we're having this conversation, it's been about 8 years that we've had the Neubie out.
That's awesome. And so you had that realization there that this was a winning, methodology, technology. The technology itself, right, is not, direct current's been around for a very long time, but it's been kind of used on the fringe, right? And I remember it for like wound care and things like that back in the day. But you saw the opportunity to kind of modernize that and take that to a different level. And so I'm kind of curious, how did that grow from what you were thinking about innovating, and then what was kind of that next step to it becoming what it is today?
I'm so glad you mentioned some of that history of direct current, because the history is fascinating. There's benefits that have been known since, at least the 1960s, 1970s, if not sooner, if not earlier. And there was always a big problem, though, that came with it, where when they turned it up to a high enough level to have therapeutic effects with using direct current, it would literally sting and burn the skin, because you get all the positive charges building up around the negative terminal or negative electrode and vice versa. And so that charge buildup creates resistance. You try to send current through there and it dissipates its heat and causes stinging and burning. So it was a case of, for decades, it was essentially abandoned. It was, the baby being thrown out with the bathwater, metaphorically speaking. And so all in its place, filling that void, came all of the alternating current technologies that we know, the TENS units, the Russian stim, interferential, FES, traditional NMES, etc. And the, there are some benefits using those, but there's also some limitations. And so, when I had this experience, it really opened my eyes to direct current. And then I just, as I got more and more interested in this field, I went and read older, from the 80s and 90s electrophysiology textbooks. And I saw some of these strategies for getting higher levels of direct current into the body that were written about back then, but no one was really using. And then I read a book called The Body Electric by Dr. Robert Becker, which is a fascinating look at the underlying electrophysiology and how the electrical system of the body controls, especially healing and regeneration and other processes too. So, I had kind of all these different influences, plus what I was seeing in the clinic every day, using some of these older versions of direct current and seeing how it helped even me as a non-clinician, of course, collaborating with clinicians again, but being able to get results with people that had tried everything else and this was actually helping them, or like just some of these crazy stories just kept sort of validating for me this ongoing hypothesis that I had, that there was really something here. And so all these different influences sort of compounded and got me motivated to finally develop something and sort of take that technology, you said modernize it, bring it into the future, or at least into the present.
Mm-hmm.
And then just on that topic of direct current, alternating current, I'm kind of skipping ahead too, but this we're this time of this recording, right, we're early mid 2025, the beginning of this year 2025, we were able to release a published study that was the first in humans comparing alternating current and direct current. And
Wow.
this I think was fascinating. There's research in animal models, and there's been different, of course, a rich body of literature on electrical stimulation generally over the years, but this, to our knowledge, was the first time ever in humans we compared alternating current and direct current head to head. And so this was a study published in the Journal of Diabetes Research, and it was 150 diabetic neuropathy patients. Half of them, so 75 patients, got traditional alternating current treatments, so like a best-in-class TENS unit, and then the other half got direct current of the Neubie. And in the group that got the alternating current treatment, what happened is what most people expected. There was some pain relief, so some value, but there was no real statistically significant or meaningful improvements in function. No real meaningful changes there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the direct current of the Neubie, not only were there similar or better improvements in pain, but there were increases in sensation, better ability to perform activities of daily living, and increases in EMG amplitude and nerve conduction velocity. So we're actually seeing some of these, that we hypothesized about healing and regenerative effects of direct current fields. We actually saw regeneration of axons, remyelination of those peripheral nerves. So there's some really amazing things. So it was sort of, I was so happy to see that, because I sort of had this belief, this hypothesis developed over the last, at that point, 18 years. And so to see that study come out, that was sort of a huge, a huge milestone.
Yeah, like a validating moment, right? That
Yeah.
all that research and stuff that you've done from the past and what you've implemented, how that, scientifically, right, is proven to work. And so honestly, that's an amazing thing. There's a huge need for, diabetic neuropathy treatments, right? But I know that there's a ton more, and you work with professional sports teams, so obviously there's a big sports component to this. Can you speak to a little bit like the different things that clinics are using the Neubie for, as far as different treatments, different audiences that they serve?
It's one of those things where it almost sounds like, is it too good to be true? You're talking about helping a diabetic neuropathy patient in their 70s with the same tool that you use with Saquon Barkley and Mike Tyson? And the answer is, well, yes, because what we're doing is affecting the nervous system. And of course, the nervous system is relevant whether you're trying to regenerate peripheral nerve signaling in a diabetic patient in their 70s, or you're trying to help anyone, general population, get out of pain, or you're trying to help Saquon Barkley increase his muscle activation, intermuscular coordination, precision of movement, rate of force development to succeed in the NFL. So that the nervous system is the common thread throughout all of that. And we see, in terms of where we see the the Neubie. So Neubie, by the way, is our flagship product for neurobioelectric stimulator. So when I say that, that's what I mean. But the use cases are very broad. A majority of the clinics we work with are sort of general population, outpatient, orthopedic, with some sports medicine mixed in. Sometimes there'll be a slightly higher, sometimes a slightly lower percentage of athletes versus general population. And they've talked about how using this technology and the NeuFit method has really shifted their framework to where now they're treating everyone like a neuro patient, even if it's someone with a quote unquote orthopedic injury, and they're getting better outcomes and everyone's having a better experience. And it's really cool by emphasizing the nervous system. And we hear from several of them that because they're now treating everyone like a neuro patient, they've started just organically to get some stroke patients or spinal cord injury patients or MS patients who they said they never would have seen before, nor would they have been confident that they could help, or neuropathy patients. But now they actually not only feel like they can help them, they are helping them. They enjoy it. They enjoy having a mix of those types of patients in there. And it's very rewarding and very gratifying for them because it's just so inspiring to see someone like that for whom there really is no solution being offered in the traditional medical model. To see that person make progress is just so energizing, empowering, and it's wonderful for the whole staff, for other patients to see it. It kind of inspires and lifts up everybody involved.
Wow, so bringing that into the clinic has kind of opened their ability to service different treatment or different diagnosis that they would never really have considered before.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow, that's really cool. And so, as they've incorporated this, have you seen in these clinics, have they grown like new programs? Have they even added on like cash services as they've done this?
Yeah, we've seen, seen many different examples of how adding in the Neubie has affected a practice. Some of it depends on how they're set up in terms of what percentage of insurance versus cash they're already doing. For ones that are, at one end of the extreme, that are all or virtually all insurance based, even they have started to see a boost, even if they're just billing insurance codes. Sometimes they can bill new codes. There are more therapeutic activities units or neuromuscular reeducation units, but even if the net revenue per visit stays similar, they're seeing increases in arrival rates, reductions in the 1, 2, 3 dropout rates, increases in referrals, patient satisfaction. And then many, a large enough percentage of their patients are choosing to stay on after the plan of care is over to continue for wellness or fitness or maintenance services. And of course, it has to be a bona fide, meet the definition of wellness or fitness, et cetera. But there's an option there in that scenario to add on to retain that relationship. You've already built this relationship with that patient and they know, like, and trust you. Mm-hmm. And there's an opportunity to continue serving them in a cash setting. So we've seen many clinics sort of add on, they're all insurance, but add on some cash-based aftercare plans like that.
That's cool.
And then there's some that are more hybrid or choose to become hybrid, and they just charge cash for the sessions with the Neubie, kind of at the other extreme. And there, the key really is, if you want someone to take money out of their pocket and give it to you, you have to provide value, right? You have to provide value that's at least as much as what you're asking for. And so when patients have these wow moments, these, aha moments in their first session, we see like 91 to 92% of patients experience functional improvements and or reductions in pain in their first Neubie session. So when they have those experiences, they're more likely to say, yes, all right, let's go ahead. Let me buy that package. I want to continue doing this. It creates that enthusiasm there. So we've had different experiences there. We see in terms of business modeling, in terms of what clinics are doing when they add the Neubie, some of them, there's different strategies, and I'm not making any recommendations. I want, in terms of billing practices, I want to let people know examples of what's been done, but please refer to your own regulatory or compliance consultant or lawyer or whoever the right person is there. But we've seen some practices, do a cash upcharge to use the Neubie if they, they can do traditional physical therapy, or they can pay additional to use the Neubie. We've seen some just, include it. We've seen some that bill it as, typically it's billed as like neuromuscular rehab, therapeutic activities, because it's part of that's sort of the overall intention of what's being done with it. We've seen some bill it as eStim for a couple of sessions and say that because those eStim codes are typically more oriented towards teaching someone to use a TENS unit for a few sessions, and they say it wouldn't be appropriate to continue billing after a few sessions. So they say, your first, call it 3 sessions, are covered with the Neubie, but if you want to use it after that, then you have to pay for it because it's no longer covered. So these are just different types of strategies that we've seen. Again, someone would have to choose what's appropriate.
Yeah, what's right for them. Yeah, but it makes sense, right? So like, it's a tool within your clinic that you can use to have a variety of different ways to market, right? And to bring people in, to service them, to get better results, better outcomes for them. So I really like that. Not only is it the technology for helping them achieve greater outcomes, but it's also a great positioning from a marketing standpoint from within the clinic. And I love what you talked there too about the psychology part of it too. So I can just imagine as a patient, you go in there, and it's one thing where you're coming into traditional PT, and you have to basically sell the patient on, okay, we're going to do this plan of care, we're going to do hands-on, we're going to do exercises, we're going to do we're trying to do this retraining. But then if you incorporate more technology into that, it's funny how the psychology works, because patients actually buy into, if you're using technology, it's got more value to it. So that was cool that you talked about higher arrival rates and probably less cancellations for people that are on that, because they're believing in that treatment because of not only the skill of the therapist, the experience, but the technology that backs that up, and something that they can do. And I just remember from being in practice, I know as a therapist, like, I could help really diagnose a patient most of the time pretty effectively without the need for an MRI. But as soon as, like, the one thing that was ingrained into the patient's mind is like, oh, I need an MRI to see what's going on. I'm like, for this case, you really might not need an MRI. It's just like a lot of expense to go through for the same kind of thing I could tell you. But they believed in that. They believed in that technology, and it was valuable to them. And so that we have to kind of consider that as therapists is like, okay, can we leverage technologies and programs within our clinic to create more of a perceived value to our public, to our audience, right? Our patients that are coming in. And the greater that perceived value, the more that they want to come to you, and the more they're willing to pay. And it's really interesting to hear how clinics have incorporated different models, right? So if they're kind of billing under some different codes for insurance, or they've kind of used it as a cash-based model to bring that component in. And I'm curious too, like, as you have worked with sports teams and professionals and clinics that are sports meds also, how do they incorporate the kind of the Neubie methodology in sports performance training?
There's some really fascinating stories there, and implementation strategies there. One thing I just want to touch on, when you talk about increasing perceived value, it definitely does that. I also think it's important that one, it's legitimately increasing perceived value. It's not just smoke and mirrors, right?
Right.
It's not just it's the perception, and there's a bona fide reality to back it up too.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, a lot of times with technology, I think there's an approach where it's like, oh, we have this technology, any idiot can do it. You can just hire a college kid to set it and forget it and stuff like that. This is not a replacement for a clinician. This is an amplifier of a clinician's skill set and abilities. If you're going to do manual therapy, or you're going to do corrective exercise with a patient, this is an amplifier, because it's going to allow you to more powerfully, more precisely, more directly impact the neurological effect, impact the patient's nervous system with that manual therapy intervention or that corrective exercise intervention. So
that's cool. Yeah, and so that's a great point there, Garrett, because as a patient, I know one of the things that causes patients to drop off in the practice is they feel they can do the exercises at home, right? So if they're coming into the clinic, and as a clinician, that you're working on a specific movement pattern or whatever it may be, and you have the Neubie there, the technology is an amplifier to making that go right. That's not something that they could easily do at home or without a skilled person. So I think that's a great point to put in there, is like, what are you doing in the clinic that shows that the what you're able to do is beyond what they could do, just at a gym, right? Or just with a massage therapist or whatever it may be. So I really like that component that you mentioned.
The top 10% of PT owners aren't just surviving, they're thriving. But what's their secret? Well, Neil Trickett's new Market to Grow book reveals how the top 10% of PT practices leverage marketing systems to simultaneously grow their new patients, attract top talent, and boost profit in their practice. You can learn from their secrets. Visit practicepromotions.net/book to claim your free copy of Market to Grow. Yes, you heard that right. We are shipping a free copy of Market to Grow to all podcast listeners who want it. Just visit practicepromotions.net/book to claim your free book. And now back to the show.
Yeah, 100%. Totally agree with that and how you framed it. And then, finally, I didn't mean to dodge your question about pro sports teams, but coming back to that.
Yeah.
So we've seen the Neubie implemented, across all the major sports leagues in North America and, Division I athletic programs and such. So there's a lot of cool use cases there. Generally speaking, depends on the sport, the size of the roster, and the ratio between the roster and the staff. In the NBA, there's a few athletic trainers taking care of 15 people, so the ratio is high. Whereas in the NFL, there's a couple more athletic trainers, but the roster is 5 or 6 times bigger, so the ratio isn't as great. So there's oftentimes, it's in an athletic training room, it's like being in a busy clinic. You don't get as much time necessarily as you'd like one-on-one with each patient or with each athlete. And so being able to use the Neubie after you've done the mapping process, which we can talk about later, and you've found where you need to put the pads to maximize the neurological effect of the intervention, you can have an athlete come in, do a session on the Neubie that's 10 or 15 minutes worth of corrective exercise on there, but you're turning it up to the edge of their comfort zone, and the input is as significant as if they were doing, every time they do a couple reps, it's like they've done 10 or 20 reps in terms of neurological input and the opportunity to make change in movement patterns and accelerate that process of neuromuscular reeducation. So you can do these very intense and short and precise and directed bouts of 10 or 15 minutes, and that can be the treatment for that day, or at least that segment of the treatment for that day, in addition to whatever other segments they might be doing. So there's an opportunity to get a lot done there, and that in a busy athletic training room setting or a busy private clinic setting is a very cool application and value proposition there. And then just expanding a little more on some of the use cases. So the Los Angeles Dodgers have the most devices. They have 7 across the organization. They have a few with Major League. Then they have one at spring training, one at each of the minor league affiliates. And so I've gotten to work very closely with their staff. Their staff is brilliant. They're also very gracious and really open-minded and wanting to learn. There's so much I can learn from them, and they're asking me for my input and stuff like that. It's really wonderful. So they use it for certainly acute injuries. There were a couple of guys like in the World Series last year that I got to see pictures and videos of them using on there, some non-public stuff. But then, they allow me to speak about different applications generally. Like they'll have their pitchers will use it before they go out to the bullpen to warm up, before they start throwing, for all of their arm care. So they're doing, movement prep, activation, neurological priming, and that shortens the amount of time it takes to warm up. But even more importantly, it makes sure that that pitcher has the right muscles engaged. So when they go out to throw, they're at their best performance-wise, they're maximally resistant to injury, and everything's working better. And then they use it afterwards to recover. So they have some, mobility and maintenance things that they work on. For hitters, they'll also do a priming thing. They have guys that'll go, if they have, a lot of rotational work. So if they have any hot spots or issues in their obliques or adductors, they'll go put pads on the position players, and they'll just go through a swinging motion or some rotational movement patterns for a few minutes to go out and play. And it helps them with, many of them get into using the Neubie because they used it for an acute injury and helped them get back so quickly. So then they use it proactively to head off any future injuries, address minor things as they come up so they don't become major things, stuff like that. And then we have also another protocol that we call our master reset, which is our version of a vagus nerve or parasympathetic nervous system stimulation activation protocol. And so they'll use that for players who are just having trouble keeping up with the stresses and challenges of a season. It's a lot to play. If it's baseball nearly every day, or if it's, NHL, all the flights and late nights. And it's just Same with NBA, of course. It can be such a grind. And so being able to get into a better recovery state, before bed, before leaving the arena for the day, or the practice facility, stuff like that, there's avenues there that can be really beneficial and helpful. And then, and back to pitchers, one other thing to mention on that, a few of them will go back into the clubhouse in between innings and use it just to kind of relax their muscles so they can be more fresh. So they, as they get into the later innings, if it's a starting pitcher, or guys in the relief pitchers in the bullpen will use it again to warm up, like before they start warming up in the bullpen in the later innings of the game. Stuff. So there's these different cool applications, but of course the nervous system controls, generally globally, the autonomic nervous system controls your state of arousal and recovery, and then locally, intermuscular coordination, recovery, blood flow, all these different things. And there's one other thing in terms of recovery that's really fascinating. I think everyone knows this, but we don't necessarily think about it or apply it. Think about, like, what is the lowest energy state? If the muscle is totally fatigued, not making enough, or not making any more ATP, do we think about, does it just relax and let go, or does it stiffen and shorten? We know it actually stiffens and shortens, right? Because the extreme case of that is death, and the corpse goes into rigor mortis. It actually contracts and stiffens because it takes ATP to relax and lengthen muscles out. And so as muscles fatigue, there is, for athletes within a game, or just generally during a season, there tends to be a shortening and stiffening of the muscles, and that makes muscles less able to lengthen to accommodate and absorb force and, accommodate ranges of motion. And it makes the body less able to bend but not break, right? It makes it, if it's more likely to break. And, obviously oversimplification of physics there, but generally speaking, that's true. And one of the cool things about this, the differences between direct current and alternating current, like we talked about the effects of tissue healing in this diabetic neuropathy population, there's also this effect on, neuromuscular education, the nervous system, where we can preferentially relax and lengthen muscles as opposed to just always contracting them. That's one of the other differences between direct and alternating current. And so that becomes really relevant when you're talking about athletes, especially fatigue within games or cumulative fatigue during the season, to be able to preferentially lengthen out muscles, restore proper movement and range of motion and blood flow and all that, can be really helpful for maintaining performance and resisting injury, throughout a season.
Makes a lot of sense, and that's some really incredible outcomes that you can get, and ways of using it, obviously, with high professional athletes, from not only like you said, injury recovery, but also kind of prep work for the game, right? And so I think what's cool there too is that if that technology is being used with high performance athletes in the major leagues, there's a lot of adult athletes out there and weekend warriors that are looking for what are the NFL using, what are the major leagues using, and if you have that in your clinic, it's a real competitive edge for recovery and buy-in from the patient, right? Hey, this is what the NFL uses. This is what Major League uses to prep and also recover quicker. So now you get that technology. It's like, oh yeah, I want that, right? So it kind of creates that.
If I can, double click on that for a moment. One of the, we had this wonderful experience working with Saquon Barkley. I got to work with him back when he tore his ACL a few years ago, and he did a promotional video for us. And of course, he had one of the best seasons in NFL history this past year. And so, many clinics that have the Neubie were sharing that video on their social media or on their website, generating a lot of buzz and enthusiasm, getting people in and interested and excited. And that was a really cool story. So he actually had his ACL surgery. He tore his ACL early in the season back when he was playing for the Giants a few seasons ago. He had his surgery, and 5 months into the recovery, he was still stiff, still weak, still having some pain. He was really stalled. And he got referred to us by a physical therapist who knew about the Neubie. And he started using it, and it changed the trajectory of his recovery. In the video that he filmed with us, he talks about how the first session he used it, he finally felt like his quad turned back on for the first time since surgery. And in the first 7 weeks of using it, he went from a lower extremity functional scale score in the low 20s out of 50 up to a 47 out of 50. I mean, just had this amazing change in the trajectory of his entire recovery. And then in the video, he talks about how he continues to use it in the same way we had just talked about, of using it to activate before he goes out to play, and use it, to maintain here and there and get ahead of little things before they become big things. And so, that video was was great. But it
That's really
it was so cool talking to him about. It was also a cool application of some of the principles we talked about just back at the very beginning of this conversation, where his nervous system was still reacting, still inhibiting, bracing, guarding, still reacting as if he had just experienced that trauma of surgery, yesterday, even though it was 5 months ago. So it was not a matter necessarily of increasing healing as much as it was a matter of helping to recalibrate, re-educate, reset his nervous system there. And that's why he got such a quick change. If you look at the trajectory of his recovery, it's literally plateaued. And then all of a sudden it just takes an 80 to 90 degree turn and just goes upward.
Yeah, that's awesome, and it makes total sense too. Because as a clinician, I know that when treating patients, no matter what their age or their background, right? From an athlete to, a senior, one of the difficulties in rehab is just muscle recruitment, and so you have inhibition from swelling and all those things that you try to achieve, and then you have the tool of differential and different electric stims to help with pain control and try to help with swelling. But we really don't, I think out there, we don't tend to use or even think with the mindset of how can we get more nervous system activation or more muscle recruitment by healing and getting the nervous system to work again for that. So I think it's a real game changer for clinicians if they can incorporate that kind of methodology thinking into their recovery for patients, because obviously you have tons and tons and tons of case studies where it shows how that really changes the course of treatment, right? The outcomes for the patient. That's really cool.
There's a lot of hundreds, thousands of case studies at this point, but also, published, peer-reviewed randomized trials and things like I mentioned the diabetic neuropathy study. We also have one at the University of South Florida looking at the effects of the Neubie compared to traditional resistance exercise on muscle hypertrophy. So this speaks exactly to what you're talking about in terms of muscle recruitment. And we saw, essentially that the acute effects are similar, and then the effects on muscle growth over a full 8-week training cycle are similar when you use the Neubie with little or no external load compared to when you're doing traditional resistance exercise with 75% of 1 rep max or whatever the load might be.
Yeah, that's really cool. And so in today's world, we've got a very challenging healthcare economy, right? We've got insurance squeezes, we've got low staff rates out there, so it's more competitive environment to get really good staff working for us, and we've got to adapt, we've got to change in our practices with this new world and become more competitive, become the ability to incorporate new things and new ways of doing things that we can't continue to do like we did in the past. And so I think this is a really cool thing, because you've definitely implemented this with clinics and helped them evolve and change into something that's a little bit different, right? And incorporating and make them more competitive in that way, in not only helping patients have better outcomes, attracting patients in with this technology. I'd imagine also if you have these kind of things in place, that it also makes it a little bit more attractive for candidates, other therapists, to come work for you. So I'm curious, as you've worked with lots and lots of clinics, how have they been incorporating this more into their practice? And so different programs that they might have in place. You mentioned some of the things before in terms of hybrid and all of that, but I'm just kind of curious, kind of positioning themselves differently in the market.
So there's a few different parts there, in terms of how they're positioning, how they're incorporating it. There's several themes that I hear from, conversations that I either have personally or that our team has with the hundreds of clinics that are using this. And there's a few that you touched on. It definitely does make that clinic, it's a differentiator. It helps the clinic using something like this, technology like this, helps the clinic stand out in the minds of patients. But as you said, it also helps the clinic stand out in the minds of potential staff therapists, who are interested and excited to work there. And we've also, on a related topic, we've heard many times that practice owners like the Neubie in particular because it allows them to hire more, new grad or younger therapists, where they can hire more for cultural fit. They don't necessarily have to hire someone who's more experienced and probably more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
They might catch some heat for saying that, but they
It's
don't.
true.
But but it allows them to hire younger therapists, and it empowers them to be really just as good as someone who has a lot more experience and has done a lot more, because it is such an amplifier on that clinical skill set. So that's been one avenue that, we've just heard enough that it really kind of bubbles up to the surface as one of these things that is on the mind of practice owners. And in terms of the differentiator, you said there, and we talked about how patient, it helps with arrival rates, retention rates, referrals, things like that, generates enthusiasm by increasing patient satisfaction. I mean, ultimately, yes, there are issues in the industry. Yes, there's a lot of, pardon my language, of bullshit going on with insurance companies and stuff like that. But ultimately, having the best product and providing the most value, is going to help you differentiate and be successful, even given all of those external circumstances, right? We want to control what we can control. And then in terms of the offerings, there's a few things that we had talked about, or new ones that we can talk about now, but a few different strategies around, for example, it could be offering a diabetic neuropathy program. That's something that we've seen that's been very successful for if that's a population you'd like to work with. We talked about it a little bit, but there's, something like 10% of the population in the United States alone. So 35 million people. I didn't realize until we really got into creating this study how staggering these numbers are. Something like 30 to 40 million people in the US alone have neuropathy, and there's really no good solution. It's all about palliative care, symptom management. No one is really helping them, improve function and actually make meaningful positive change. So to be able to offer a solution to people like that is fabulous. And some are billing insurance, some are adopting this notion that there actually is an interesting somewhere, I don't know if it's in the Medicare handbook, or I don't know exactly, somewhere. I had a conversation with Mary DeLong, who's a very good, well-known regulatory consultant, and she had talked about how electrical stimulation is not covered for neuropathy. And so, that can be an opportunity to do a cash service if you're having a neuropathy package or something like that. So that's one avenue that's been very helpful for people. And then, some of the other strategies, of course, with the same compliance caveats that we talked about earlier, where sometimes people are just including the Neubie, sometimes there's a cash upcharge, or sometimes it's covered during the plan of care, but these aftercare, maintenance, wellness, when appropriate, packages afterwards that are cash. So having some cash to help diversify, depending on your demographics and where you are, what you're comfortable with. I've heard people recommend, you want to be 80 insurance, 20 cash. I've heard some people say you want to shoot for 50-50. Of course, some people just say to heck with it and go all cash. It's just, it's tough to do that at scale at multiple locations. If it's just you and a small team in one location, sure. But to scale, so I understand I don't know that it's necessarily even been done. I don't know any examples of, people that have really multiple locations, significant staff and scale without any insurance.
I think, I do think the future for PT and for rehab is that hybrid model. You have to incorporate more cash programs. And you see it across the board in healthcare. It's funny because I went to the dentist not too long ago, and they were offering Botox in the clinic. And it's just like one of those, like, well, that doesn't really fit for me anyway, but it's another cash line that this dentist was trying to incorporate into their business. So it's not just rehab that's having challenges. It's really across the healthcare spectrum, and you see it in a lot of clinics where they're trying to bring in different cash services, and the public is wanting those things too. Like, it's not that they're offering something that the public doesn't want, but the public is willing to pay more for health services than they did in the past. And there's lots of different things that you could offer there. And I think, again, if you can get to that position where you are like 80-20, in your clinic, that's a much stronger position than if you're 100% insurance based.
Yeah, for sure.
But you have to think outside the box, and you have to think about how am I bringing in these different programs that can enhance what I currently do. And I think Neubie is a fantastic fit for that. So obviously you've grown a really, big company here, and, started out from being an engineer, a student, to having this awesome company now. So in your entrepreneurial journey, I'm curious, what was your biggest mindset shift you've experienced in this journey as an entrepreneur?
There's so many. I really believe well, let me put it this way. People often ask me, like, oh, are you trying to build and sell NeuFit or something like that? And my answer is no, I have no intention of selling it, because part of it is part of it is running a business and the wonderful impact that it makes in the world. And then also in terms of, if I look at the reasons why I would sell it, well, why would I sell it? Well, I'm bored. I mean, if I'm not the right person anymore for the business, perhaps, but if I'm bored, or I want to do something else or something like that. But I also see so many ways where, owning a business, and I'm sure many of the practice owners listening to this feel the same way too. I've seen so many ways where owning and leading this business has been a catalyst for learning, personal development. I would even say spiritual growth. And so understanding understanding that the outcomes that happen in the world are a direct reflection of how I show up. What I get really essentially is who I am. And so that's ultimately what I have to work on. So the business is such a catalyst for learning, for personal development. I think that's been one of them. And then along the way, that's something that I've learned upon reflection and reading and learning over the years. Along the way, also one of the biggest shifts for me was even perhaps more fundamental than a mindset shift. I would say it was an identity shift. For me, I mentioned I was working as a quasi clinician. I was working with people, with patients, with clients for many years, and I derived, if I'm being totally honest, I derived a large sense of my self-worth and identity from being in there helping patients have these aha moments. It was like a big rush to help someone, a spinal cord injury patient, actually start to move their legs again and begin to walk after 25 years, or to help an athlete who was hobbling in after an acute sprained ankle be able to walk out and feel 50% better and get back and play in a game that weekend when they were supposed to miss 3 or 4 games. I mean, these things were just like so wonderful and exciting. And so I eventually got to this point of friction where I realized that when I'm in there working one-on-one with, an individual client, that I'm not able to spend that time zooming out, looking at the big picture, moving the pieces around strategically to see how we can grow the business. I'm not able to support my team, right? The people who direct report to me, or who we say the direct supports, all these things that I'm not able to do to help drive the business forward. I'm sort of abdicating my responsibility for some sort of ego, identity-based need or something like that. So that was kind of a painful realization, but I had to take myself out of that to be able to focus on more of the things that I need to be doing as the CEO of a whether it's a clinic business or a medical device business. The same story is true. I think we have to be able to focus on the few things that are within our control, which is hiring, retaining, and supporting other key players that can own individual segments of the business, driving forward, whether it's strategic initiatives or strategic relationships, or different things that we're uniquely suited to do as the owners, leaders, founders, CEOs, et cetera, of the business.
That's awesome advice, and I 100% agree. I mean,
Yeah.
it really starts with that, like, who are you, right? Who do you need to be? And I've seen it. To me, the practice owners and business owners that I see that are successful, they kind of keep putting themselves in, okay, if I want to have $1 million practice, who do I need to be in order to get there? If I want a $10 million practice and 10 locations, what do I need to be to get there, right? And so they kind of keep putting themselves in the future of who they need to be. And that's what drives them forward. Because and then the opposite end of that spectrum is that the practice owners that say, yeah, I want to have $1 million practice, but they're like, I really enjoy treating, right? And I am a clinician, they keep that mindset of I'm a clinician, but they don't have that full realization that I need to be the CEO of my practice, right?
Yeah.
Because I need to make sure I get the right people in place to do these functions for the business to help people. So it's really that I love that you said that, because it is so true of who you need to be and how you need to show up for your business and where you want your business to be in the future. So thanks for that mindset shift there, and congratulations on all your success with NeuFit. I think it's an amazing product. It's definitely a game changer in the industry. So I'm curious for our listeners out there, what's the best way for them to learn more about NeuFit and the Neubie system?
So there's probably two best ways. First is to go to our website, which is www.neu.fit. That's NEU, like neurological, .fit. And then we're also active on social media. I just in the last year started a personal page, which is just on Instagram, my first last name, Garrett.Salpeter. And then we have our NeuFit page, of course, which is NeuFit RFP for rehab, fitness, and performance. And love to interact with people on social media. And then also on our website, there's a lot of information. There's also a contact form you can get in touch with our team. We're happy to talk with anyone if they have clinical or business related questions unique to their context and situation. We're happy to talk with you, and there's options too to, like, if you're thinking this is interesting, for example, and you want to try out the machine, but you're like, I'm not ready to buy something. There's options where you could rent it for a few months and apply those payments towards a purchase or stuff. There's stuff like that that our team can talk about with you too. We want to help people get onboarded so they can experience it, in some capacity.
Oh, that's awesome. Love it. Great. Well, thank you, Garrett, so much for being on here, sharing your wisdom, helping us understand this new fantastic technology that clinics are using to get better outcomes with their patients and obviously enhance programs there. And to our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on the podcast here. Appreciate your time, and I hope you got a lot out of this episode. Don't forget to follow our podcast, subscribe to it, and also to our YouTube channel where we'll put out a lot of great tips and advice for you. And check out practicepromotions.net for lots of great marketing tips and advice for your practice. So, Garrett, thank you so much for being on with us here today. And wishing you much success in your business. And for our audience out there, wishing you much success in your practice.
A free way for you to support our show is by leaving a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's a chance for you to tell us what you love about the show, and it helps others discover it as well. Just scroll down to ratings and review on your phone and click write a review. Thanks.